Hello, I'm Andy, percussionist with Hainault Brass Band and editor of the videos that you have been watching over the last year. Now, as we approach what is hopefully the end of lockdown, I wanted to share a little behind the scenes video of how we kept going throughout coronavirus restrictions and how we created and shared our virtual performances. Sometime in March 2020, the band played our last full concert together, and like everyone else at the time, we assumed that we'd all be back together playing after just a couple of weeks hiatus. Well, as those weeks turned into months and as band rehearsals quickly turned into Zoom drinks, it became clear we wouldn't be playing together for some time. Now, at the time, a lot of the top UK bands were turning their hands to virtual performances, that is, recordings of each individual part in the player's home setting, and compiling those together to create a full score of music. Well, how hard could this all be, we thought, as we decided to give this a go ourselves. Everyone records their part, you surely just line up the first bar of all the videos and you're away, right? Well, as we quickly learned, it turns out there's quite a bit more to it than that. It starts with me creating a click track, which is essentially a computer synthesized metronome, which everyone plays along to as they record their parts. The click gets sent first to the soloist or to a small handful of players, dependent on the piece, whose parts act as familiar grounding for the rest of the band. Everyone records in exactly the same way. They listen to the click track on headphones whilst they record a video on their mobile phones. There's no fancy equipment, microphones or cameras beyond that, and the decision to do this was to level the playing field. Now, some of the band members may well have had access to higher quality recording equipment or cameras, but these days mobile phones are generally of a high standard anyway, and they don't tend to differ greatly from one another. So it does mean that everyone is recording their takes broadly on the same equipment, and therefore you get the same audio qualities. Once I get that first solo line back, I import it into my video editing software and line it up with the click track, which now acts as my guide in which to match everything to. As we've learned throughout this process, performing a single part in isolation without any direction from a conductor and without the familiar setting of the band around you and how your part integrates with the wider piece is actually an incredibly difficult challenge, and most of the band had never done anything like this before. You happy?
I'd like to do C again.
It's therefore completely natural that every part will fluctuate slightly from the click track guide. Not really noticeable in isolation, but if everyone fluctuates at slightly different points, then the overall performance will lack cohesion and togetherness. It's therefore my job to make slight tweaks to each part, extending and shortening notes by a few frames, just to make sure every part is tight to the guide. It really isn't much. We're talking fractions of seconds, and actually to do it too much would result in the piece sounding artificial and synthesized, but just the right amount makes the world of difference to the finished article. At the end of this process, I'm left with a take with lots of cuts, as you'll see. Now, to play this through would sound clicky, and if you were to watch, you may notice a slight jump as we pass each cut. Using an auto transition tool smooths over these cuts, blending each segment together, giving the result of a seamless single track. An alternative would be to get everybody to record their audio separately and then mime along to the completed video. However, I find this far more time consuming, and I like the fact that what you're watching is always the real sound from that instrument at any given time. So now we've got the completed solo line, plus maybe some other parts dependent on the piece. I then send these out mixed with the click track to the rest of the band to record their parts too, so they're actually listening to the solo as they play. This we found really helps with tuning and intonation. For some pieces, we've actually broken this down even further and gradually layered up the parts sectionally. As the parts get submitted to me, I go through them just as I did with the solo, making tweaks and adjustments as necessary, and it also gives me an opportunity to correct any slight mistakes or fluffs if there are any. Now, as a percussionist, a word on the drums. Now, normally I've only got access to an electric kit at home, which makes recording my part slightly trickier. So I record along to the click track just as everybody else does, but my hits are also being recorded by the computer, which is translating these into sampled drum sounds. Without that, well, it would just sound like a lot of annoying tapping. But I have the added benefit of being able to change the sound of the kit to suit the piece after I've recorded it. I line up the mix down of the sampled recordings to the annoying tapping in the video, and it's like I'm playing a real kit. The downside with this is that drum rolls do sound artificial on the electric kit, so for Nimrod I've got hold of a real snare drum and will be recording my part just like everyone else. Once everyone's submitted a recording, conductor included, which as an aside in isolation is something quite unusual, I then start work on the visual aspect of the performance. I start by placing everyone in that familiar Zoom style grid. Now, as the audience, you'd normally face the band with the conductor facing away from you, with cornets on the left and trombones on the right, basses out the back. But because Kev is face onto the video, you're now watching the band as though you are in it, as though you are me sat at the back as the percussionist. I therefore place everyone in reverse, swapping the cornets to the right and trombones to the left. This means when Kev gestures to instruments in the grid, it looks like he's conducting the right ones. I add some panning to each part, which is the way of placing those parts in the stereo spectrum, such that the instruments on the right-hand side of the grid now come out the right-hand speaker on your headphones, and vice versa. A touch of reverb or echo is then added for two reasons. It helps glue the individual recordings together, making it sound like everybody is recording or performing in the same acoustic space. It also has the added benefit of masking slight imperfections in tuning. Now comes the creative bit, cutting away from the master grid to give focus on individual parts and solo lines and counter melodies as we hear them. And I do try where possible to time fades and cuts in time with the music and the beat. And finally, a quick word on some of the extras that you've seen throughout the year. The cutaways of Rachel and I playing badminton during Aces High took the best part of a morning to film. It actually took us a good 10 minutes just to get from the living room to the garden, as we keep having to retrace our footsteps just to film from different angles.
2, 1, go.
In reality, you only see us running for a few seconds. The sunrise from First Light was filmed by one of my colleagues at work on a night shift and is of the Media City Plaza in Salford Quays. This was actually the third attempt at shooting the sunrise, as the previous mornings had been predictably northern and were too grey and overcast to use. The shots of the telegraph poles to reference the lonely Wichita lineman were partly borrowed from holiday footage from Scotland, and I now can't drive down a road without noticing what might make the perfect telegraph shot. And finally, the shaker sound that you hear in the Blues Brothers is actually just a pot of hundreds and thousands after all. Thank you so much for supporting us by watching our videos throughout the last year. The virtual performances have helped keep the band together and provide an outlet for us to continue to play for you. And of course, your kind comments have helped and encouraged us and made us want to challenge ourselves to record even more. We really do look forward to performing for you again in public, hopefully in the not too distant future, and we do look forward to seeing you there.
Finally.